all set?
Commissioner Alderetti, Commissioner Becerra,
Here.
Vice Chair Contreras Leo,
Here.
Chairman McLaughlin,
Here.
Commissioner Mendoza, here, Commissioner Nguyen,
Here.
Commissioner Verino.
Here.
Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum.
Thank you. Would you all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, please? Phil, would you lead us in the pledge?
Ready? Begin. I
I
pledge
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America
and
and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. We are now open for public comments. Does a member of the public have any public comments on non-agenda items? You may fill out a request form to speak with the secretary, and after introduction, have 3 minutes to speak unless an extension of time is granted by the chairperson. Hearing no public comments, we will close the public comments at this point in time. We're moving to the consent calendar. We have 3 items on the consent calendar, and the first item is the minutes from the regular meeting of September 25th, 2017. Do we have a motion on that, on those minutes?
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion to approve the balance of the consent calendar.
Second.
Okay. Therefore, is that okay? Okay, we'll move the whole calendar. And that will include the excused absence for Mr. Eric Alderetti. Okay. We have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? 6-0 with Eric Alderetti absent. We will now move on to the business calendar. Please be advised that the action of the Planning Commission is final following consent of City Council unless, if allowed by the Santa Ana Municipal Code, an appeal to the City Council is filed with the clerk of the council and a copy is sent to the Planning Department within 10 days of the date of the Commission's actions, or unless set forth in public hearing by the City Council. An appeal from a decision or requirement of the Planning Commission may be made by any interested party, individual, or group. We'll move on to public hearing item number 1, site plan review number 2017-06, variance number 2017-03, and tentative parcel map number 2016-04 to allow the construction of a 2-story, 51,024 square feet building at 1701 East St. Andrews Place. Do any of the commissioners have anything that they wish to disclose with regard to this item?
Mr. Chair, I'd like to disclose my membership within the Santa Ana Elks Lodge, so I will be recusing myself on this item.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else?
I have a question.
Go ahead.
So if you're part of the credit union, do I need to?
You can disclose that, but that's not.
Okay, I'm a member of the Orange County Credit Union.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, I am as well.
Okay, so we have 2. All right. Staff will now make a presentation on this item.
Mr. Chairman, due to some recently received information from adjacent property owner, we requested a 2-week continuance on this item to allow us the ability to review the letter, meet with the applicant as well as adjacent property owner, and then come back to you in 2 weeks with a presentation and a recommendation.
Okay, have both parties agreed to that at this point in time?
They have agreed to that, yes.
Okay. At this point in time, do we have any motion on continuance?
I'll move continuance for 2 weeks to the October 23rd meeting.
Okay.
I'm
Do we have a
second.
Second? Mr. Moon? All right, any discussion? Hearing no discussion, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? 5-0, one absence with Phil Becerra, and one absent with Eric Alderetti. So I'm assuming that we had 2 cards for that motion, for that particular item. We're not going to be having the public hearing on that. Okay? All right. Okay. This is the time and place for the public hearing on item number 2, zoning ordinance amendment number 2017-01, to update various sections of Chapter 41 of the Santa Ana Municipal Code pertaining to tattoo parlors, farmers markets, and after-hour operations in the commercial and South of Main zoning district. Do any of the commissioners have anything they wish to disclose with regards to this item? Hearing none, we'll start with the staff presentation, please.
Good evening, Chairperson, members of the Planning Commission. This is part of the continuous staff effort to streamline the zoning code and the development process of the city. And this is part 2 of the zoning ordinance streamline. The code sections that will be amended under this zoning ordinance streamline 2.0 include 1, farmers market, which is section 41-195.5. This section will allow certified farmers market in all commercial and industrial zones with the approval of a land use certificate, which is a staff level approval similar to sidewalk sales, parking lot promotions, bazaars, fiestas, and just similar temporary outdoor activities. They will be allowed up to 52 days a year, which is basically 1 day a week throughout the year, and they will be limited to certain hours of operation. I also circulated an additional 3 operational standards to ensure that they will keep the property clean before and after, and to allow emergency vehicle circulation on site. The next section that we're amending is to allow aftermarket use in the CSM zone. The CSM zone is the Commercial South Main District. Currently, in all other commercial zones, retail markets that are operating after hours are allowed subject to a conditional use permit, with the exception of the Commercial South Main District. So this amendment will allow after-hours operation for retail markets to be allowed in the Commercial South Main District with a conditional use permit, which is similar and consistent to all other commercial zones in the city. The next section, which I will pass it on to my colleague, Jerry, that he will go into the tattoo parlor amendments.
All right, so this is the last phase of this proposed code amendments updates. And then the last one has to deal with tattoo and body art establishments. We had a lot of inquiries about the public and wanting to open up tattoo establishments in downtown. And then while we were doing that, we started doing some research, and we found some court cases that pretty much looked at our zoning code, and we were kind of deficient in terms of that aspect. One court case was back in 2010, City of Hermosa or Anderson versus City of Hermosa, and that pretty much dictated that cities cannot ban or prohibit tattoo establishments within their jurisdiction. Then more recently, at the beginning of this year, in Real versus the City of Long Beach, the court basically ruled that there should be enough zoning areas where tattoo establishments are allowed. So what we are basically proposing, we're proposing to allow tattoo establishments in the C1, which is general commercial, C2 community commercial, and C4 zoning districts. We met with the subcommittee back in early September and discussed this briefly with them. And at that meeting, they did mention to us that they wanted to have an analysis of where these tattoo establishments can potentially open up. So the red, as indicated in the map, shows the allowed areas, which is C1, C2, and C4 again. Then we did highlight the schools and parks. And then the buffer is basically a 500-foot buffer requirement from sensitive uses. So again, there is some areas that they will be allowed to open, but then again, they do need to meet distance requirements. We're also allow tattoo establishments within our transit zoning code, SD 84, and this is pretty much in our downtown area. But we're not allowing them throughout all of downtown. It's going to be limited to these 4 subzones, which is Transit Village, then we have downtown, urban center, and corridor. And then we also looked at our current harbor mixed-use transit zoning code. Again, these are specific plans or specific developments that are more transit-oriented and kind of made sense for the city to allow them in these particular areas. So again, just like the transit zoning code, we only are going to be allowing them in certain sections. So transit node and corridor, which are the highlighted areas in purple, light purple, and that burgundy purple color. And then the last zoning district that we're looking to allow is basically our overlay zone, our Metro East mixed-use overlay zone. And then again, we're only going to be allowing them in certain subzones within that overlay. And then we did provide some operational development standards within your staff report, but just to highlight a quick operational standards that we're imposing, we are going to be imposing a 500-foot distance requirement from sensitive uses, so that, again, that'll be parks and schools, only within the C1, C2, and C4 zoning districts. This distance requirement would not apply to the other 3 specific areas. In addition to that, the tattoo establishments are going to be limited to operate between the hours of 12 a.m. and 7 a.m. If they do want to operate between those hours, then they will have to apply for a conditional use permit, which will bring forward to the Plan Commission. And then just one more development standard, they would have to be 500 feet from another similar establishment. That pretty much sums up our presentation, but I'll be more than happy to go back with any of these slides if you have questions.
Does the commission have any questions of staff?
I do, Mr. Chairman. Could you tell me what the health regulation regarding to penetration of skin exposed, possible infection, beside the city court ordinance? What about the health code and requirement by health department for the tattoo?
Correct. So they would still have to basically, just like any other business, if the state or the health department requires any additional license, they would have to obtain that license prior to coming into the city and obtaining a business license through us. So our business license division makes sure that they have complied with the other requirements.
So they comply with the health department and any other state requirements.
That's correct.
Before we can issue the permit.
That's correct. So one of the operational requirements is the applicant of the tattoo establishment facility shall comply with the applicable state and local laws as they may be amended by time to time, including the health department safety code sections 11930, etc. And then the police department also threw in a penal code section 563 and 655, as well as chapter 18, which is pretty much governed by our business license department.
Thank you.
Okay, Patrice?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a question regarding one statement that is made. It says that currently tattoo parlors establishments are only allowed in the heavy industrial M2 zone with an approval, CUP. I know that when we met as a subcommittee, you had said that we have none. Did we have any applications that were denied?
I believe we haven't had any application that was denied, but at the moment we don't have any tattoo establishments within city limits.
Okay, and the other, in the report, one of the statements says that those under 18 years of age are not going to be allowed without a parent.
Correct.
Is that for them to get a tattoo, or just in general, they just cannot enter an establishment?
That's in general. They will not be able to enter the premises unless they are accompanied by an adult
Okay,
or legal guardian.
okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Hearing none, Madam Secretary, have we received any written communications on this item? Okay. We'll now open up for a public hearing. Anybody that has not filled out a card that would like to speak at this time, please fill out a request to speak card with the Secretary. I have one request at this moment. Gillard Salmon?
Hi, good evening. ETAC meets here, so thank you for warming up our seats for tomorrow morning. I'm coming, though, as a resident, and mainly of Henninger Park, which is the neighborhood next to South Main, south of First. And one of the issues that we keep seeing in our neighborhood is as whether it's zones streamlining or street improvements, there's all these things happening on South Main, and the neighborhood on either side of South Main are not being reached out to. So, I'm all for streamlining development codes and making it easier for folks to invest in Santa Ana. At the same time, I think it's really important that if businesses are going to be allowed to operate between 12 and 5, that we at least give a heads up to the neighborhoods nearby so that they can come and voice whatever concerns they might have about that. So that's first. Second, in terms of the tattoo parlors, you are streamlining the commercial South Main zone in order to match the other CSMs, and then you see all these permitted uses for tattoo parlors all over the city, and then it's not being allowed on South Main, unless I missed that. Is it being allowed on South Main? So it's odd that commercial South Main is this commercial corridor. It's expected to act as as a business corridor. We're trying to make it more walkable and transit friendly, and then we're treating it differently as Main north of First. And so I hope that you guys take a look at that and see if maybe South Main would be an appropriate place as well to have these establishments. As you know, there's a lot of vacancies on that street, and so the idea that we would limit business uses on that street is a little concerning. And then lastly, just a quick note about the accessory dwelling units, which you're going to have as a work study later. I'm incredibly concerned about the requirement that we not build ADUs in park-deficient areas, because park-deficient areas already have the density, and they already...
If you could stay on target with the item you asked to talk about, item number 2, not item number 3.
Oh, okay.
So,
usually they want us to combine.
No,
okay, so I'll come back and talk about that.
You asked to go on item number 2. Talk about item number 2.
Yeah, all I'm saying is we've been asked in the past to combine, so that because we only can speak one time for the 3 minutes. So now that I understand that, I'll state it too. I appreciate that.
You can speak
on
multiple items.
Again, I just to recap. Please reach out to the neighborhoods that are surrounding commercial South Main when you're going out and doing improvements or changing the allowed uses even with the CUP. And also with that, if we're going to be treating commercial South Main like other commercial districts, why not allow tattoo parlors on that street? Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comments at this moment? If you would, sure, you can fill it. You come on up and you can talk, and then fill out the sheet afterwards. It's okay.
My name is Mary Thornton. I live in Wilshire Square, which is also affected by the South Main District. And I came to this meeting because we get the planning agenda and didn't really say what this zoning ordinance was about. But I'm very, also like my fellow neighbor over here, very concerned about the 12 midnight to 5 a.m. operating of retail businesses. What exactly is defined as a retail business? And are we talking about restaurants, bars, massage parlors? Because we have all of those on South Main. And the thing about the stretch of South Main from First to Warner particularly, that commercial corridor is very close to homes. I mean, a lot of homes back right up to some of those businesses. So I don't really understand what the driver is to have that midnight to 5 a.m. zoning allowed in that stretch, in that commercial corridor. Maybe south of Warner, it might be different because that's mostly industrial down there, but the stretch from First to Warner, homes are very close to the Main Street corridor, commercial businesses. So I'd really like to question if that's really necessary and what is driving that change and why.
So just to clarify, we're only pretty much amending the code to allow retail markets. Restaurants right now in the CSM zone are currently allowed to open within those hours with a CUP.
So what do you consider a market? Like
So
a
per
little mini mart?
definition, it would be anything that's within or less than 20,000 square feet, so a mini market, correct?
Okay. I still am not really sure I see the need for that. And plus, I just think the noise and the commotion that could be caused for the residents, I don't think it's necessary. So I would ask you to consider that because I don't know how many of you are that familiar with that area, but homes do back right up to the businesses.
Mm-hmm.
So, and sometimes the parking lots are out and back. So I just don't think that that's really a wise plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other?
I do want to add to that comment. The requirement would be to include retail markets that want to open between midnight and 5 a.m. subject to the approval of a conditional use permit. A conditional use permit is a public hearing process, which all the neighbors will be notified at that time, and they will have the opportunity to participate in the decision-making process, as well as voicing their concerns and opinions about a particular location.
Thank you, Ann. Hearing no more public hearing at this point in time, we will close the public hearing and take it back to the commission. Do I have a motion to consider item number 27, number 2? Go ahead.
From city staff, why is South Main not included? Yeah, for being able to open up a tattoo shop.
So part of the analysis originally began with a community survey that was distributed through like an email blast, and it was also posted on social media. And we did list the abundance of our commercial districts, and the ones that were highlighted the most were C1, C2, and C4. But in terms of operations and issues with South Main Street, I believe the staff wouldn't have any issue with that, to include that into the ordinance.
So if somebody came and wanted to open up a business on South Main that was a tattoo parlor, they'd go through the same process as anybody else. We're not saying that it's closed off to them.
As proposed, the ordinance basically does not allow them in South Main.
Does not allow them.
Correct. But if you want us to further look into that, we're more than certain to look
But
into
Jerry,
that.
that's because that area is not zone C1, C2, or C3.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Bill?
So just so we're all clear and understanding the same thing, I want to make sure we didn't miss anything. So as far as with the CSM zone, the uses that you're proposing be allowed, which are the markets, they would still go through the traditional conditional use permit, which would still require 500 feet notice, 10 days prior to a hearing. I mean, those things would all still apply. There's no streamlining to the point that we're now expediting past any public noticing or requirements of that nature.
That's correct.
Okay. And the same thing with the tattoo parlors. We haven't had them before, but again, they're not going to be allowed by right. I mean, there's some cities where they've gone extreme, but what you guys are proposing is much more measured in the sense that it's still going to be an item that's publicly noticed, comes to the Planning Commission if it's open after midnight.
Correct. So if they're opened from 7 to 12, then it's going to be permitted by right. If they want to open after hours, then the conditional use permit is going to be required.
Okay. So they're not going to be 24-hour establishments.
Correct.
Okay.
And we only put in that language just to allow flexibility in downtown.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Patrice?
I just wanted to get some clarification because I know that some of the speakers said that they did not have access to the agenda or the whole agenda. But on there, it does read that on August 10, the staff hosted a community meeting and presented an overview of the history and culture of tattooing, etc. Can you tell me how well attended was the meeting, or if you remember how many members of the public were there?
We actually had the presentation twice. I believe we have approximately 12 to 13 individuals attend.
For the two sessions?
I'm sorry.
You said you had 2 sessions or 2 presentations?
We had 2 sessions. We had the presentation originally began around 5:30, if I'm not mistaken, and then we were pretty much done early. And then we had a group of other group of members or a wave of other individuals. So we gave the presentation twice.
Okay, and I know you said you have a total of 131 surveys. And going back to the presentations again, where did you hold these meetings?
So the meeting was held in this room, and it was held in, I believe it was held a little bit earlier, if I'm not mistaken, than usual. We were trying to target the tattoo industry as well as individuals. We also had a different meeting that kind of followed that. But it was held at City Hall.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions of staff? Okay, hearing none. Do we have a recommended action on this? Someone like to make a motion?
Chairman McLaughlin, I'd like to make a motion.
Okay,
I'd recommend that the city council adopt an ordinance approving zoning ordinance amendment number 2017-01 to revise certain sections of of chapter 41 zoning of the Santa Ana Municipal Code.
I'll second with comment. I just want to thank staff for bringing this forward to us. I know that we've got a big general plan update coming along, and I appreciate the fact that you guys haven't just put the brakes on everything else going on in the city. You've recognized that there are some needs that need to be addressed, and it's not worth holding off. So I really do appreciate this, because I know that sitting on that subcommittee, this isn't the first time you've brought amendments to us. So I'm seconding it with the appreciation of what staff has done, and I'll be supporting it, obviously.
any further discussion? No. Hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? 6-0, and Eric Alderetti is absent. With that, we'll end the business calendar at this point, and we will move into the work study session. The first item on the work study session is the accessory dwelling unit ordinance. Ricardo, will you be presenting to it?
I will.
All right, go ahead.
All right. How's everyone doing tonight?
Good.
So tonight, what we hope to cover is accessory dwelling units, and hopefully the commission will get an understanding of first what an accessory dwelling unit is, and then the draft ordinance that staff has been working on. So again, these are the topics we're going to be covering tonight. We usually cover ordinance amendments or present them initially to the subcommittee, but we thought that this was a ordinance that had enough public interest and interest from the commissioners that we thought we'd present this to the entire body. So first, what's an ADU or an accessory dwelling unit ordinance? A lot of people refer to them as granny flats or mother-in-law units, but typically they tend to be a smaller unit that is located at the back of a residence. It's ancillary residential use to your existing single-family residence. And they tend to take on 3 different forms, which are presented there in the graphic. So you can have a detached unit that's separate, completely separate from the main primary residence, and has its own living facilities for a person or whoever chooses to live there. And then the second would be an attachment or an addition made to an existing residence that's then converted to an additional unit. And then the third would be the conversion of an existing space. So taking a part of your existing house or an existing structure that's located on your property and then converting it into an additional unit. So just to give some background, back in 2003, the state enacted what was called then the Granny Flat Ordinance. And that same year, the city of Santa Ana adopted a local ordinance to regulate accessory dwelling units in the city. So since then, from 2003 to the end of 2016, the city approved and 31 units were constructed in the city of Santa Ana. Since then, starting January 1st of this year, the state adopted a new ordinance which essentially made our local ordinance null and void because there was some conflicting language in our local ordinance and in the new state law. So since January 1st of this year, we haven't had a local ordinance, and we've been having to review and approve applications for accessory dwelling units per the state standard. Since then, we've actually received well over 30 applications to construct accessory dwelling units. Those applications are at different phases. Some are still in plan check, and others are permits have been issued. To my knowledge, I'm not sure if any have been finished being constructed, but they're all kind of different stages of that process. So what the state law said is that the city does not have to have a local ordinance. However, if we choose not to have one, we have to continue to review and process applications for accessory dwelling units by the state law. So we wouldn't have any local control of accessory dwelling units. And if we do decide to adopt an ordinance, the ordinance that we adopt has to be held to that measure there that says we can't impose any language that's arbitrary, excessive, or burdensome to the construction of accessory dwelling units. And in addition to that, I just wanted to highlight, because we have had a lot of community concern and comments asking if we can completely prohibit ADUs from the city. And the way the state law is written, we cannot prohibit ADUs from the city of Santa Ana. And in addition to that, there are some state mandated exceptions for existing spaces that are converted to ADUs and parking exceptions. I'll get into that in a second. Let's see here. So one, conversion of the existing spaces. So if you have an existing, say, workshop that was permitted in the 70s and it was built, say, 2-3 feet from the property line, if today you would want to convert that space into an accessory dwelling unit, the city cannot say, now you have to comply with the current setback standards and you have to move the building to meet the current standards. If it's existing, you can convert it to an accessory dwelling unit without having to comply with the existing setback standards. The other big one, especially in our city that has a lot of parking issues, is the parking requirement and parking exemptions. The state does allow the city to impose parking standards. So in the draft that we're going to be presenting to you shortly in a couple weeks, we are requiring parking be required for each ADU or accessory dwelling unit. However, they built in 5 exceptions to that parking requirement. So the first of which being if you're located within half mile of public transit, the city cannot require that the property owner provide any additional parking for the accessory dwelling unit. So the city can still require parking for the house, just not any additional for the accessory dwelling unit. And then the 4 others, if you're located within a historic district, if you're within a block of a car share program, or if you're in an area that has a parking permit program and parking permits aren't being given to the accessory dwelling unit residents. And then the other, if you're converting an existing space, so part of a home, part of an existing building, then we can't require any additional parking be provided for the ADU. So what we hope to accomplish with the local ordinance is to actually look at how these are going to be integrated into our neighborhoods. We have received a lot of concern from neighbors as we start to see these things being built and being proposed, how they're going to affect the neighborhood character, how it's going to be integrated into that existing fabric, and how we can impose development standards through the adoption of a local ordinance to kind of stay away from something that may be intrusive on neighbors' privacy, that may result in something not fitting in with the existing character. One of the other things that we're looking at is park deficiency. As most of you are aware, our city is deficient in park space, open space. So what this map here shows in green are all the city-owned private open spaces or parks. And prior to the first of this year, we had a local ordinance that had this language in there saying that if you are located within a space or area of the city that's considered park deficient, then you cannot you cannot permit a new accessory dwelling unit ordinance. So what the map shows in pink are those areas that are more than 1/4 mile from a pocket park or more than a half mile from a neighborhood park. And then the sizes there are included for what's considered a pocket park and what's considered a neighborhood park. So those areas would not be permitted by right. However, there is a clause in the draft that says if you do happen to be within one of these areas, you can still apply for what's considered a minor exception. It's similar to a variance, but instead of it being heard before the Planning Commission, the zoning administrator would hear this And it would be the same public notification process that was described in the earlier item with a 500-foot radius to let the neighborhood know that someone's proposing this at that site. And then other issues would be looked at, such as if you're locating within an area that's considered park deficient, are you then providing above and beyond open space on your own property for residents of those 2 units to utilize? So one of the other things we hope to accomplish with the local ordinance is to impose development standards. So currently, we're kind of limited of what we can impose based on what the state standard says or state law says. So with the adoption of the local ordinance, we'd be able to implement setbacks, height standards or limits, lot coverage standards, impose design guidelines, and then limit the size. Currently, the state says you can build a 1,200 square foot unit if it's detached, or if it's attached, up to 1,200 square feet, but not to exceed 50% of the size of the existing residence. So what we're looking to do is kind of tighten that up a little bit and be more consistent with what our previous ordinance says and limit the size at 750 square feet or 50% of the existing residence, whichever of those 2 measurements happen to be smaller. So lastly, with the parking exceptions that are implemented by the state, we've been looking at how we define transit, because the state law does allow local jurisdictions to define transit and then look at the proximity to that. So initially, we were looking at every single bus stop in the city of Santa Ana and then drafting a half-mile buffer around each transit stop. And what that left us pretty much is the entire city of Santa Ana being within half mile of a transit stop. So as we started to look at the map and then the bus service that we have here in town, we refined our definition a bit to only include bus routes that have 15-minute or less headways or service intervals. So meaning from the time one bus arrives to the time the next bus arrives, it would be 15 minutes or less. And then taking a look at where those routes run through the city, where those stops are, and then creating the half-mile buffer or radius around that. So what you see in this map in pink would be the areas that fall within half mile of one of those transit stops and would be exempt from providing any additional parking for the accessory dwelling unit. And then the areas that are not highlighted would be those areas that are outside of that. So those are the kind of larger topics that are going to be covered in the accessory dwelling unit ordinance. We have a draft available to view on our webpage, and then we're going to be sending you all copies of the draft so you can have the language in front of you. And then if any other more detailed questions or comments come up, we can have that incorporated into the draft before we present to you on the 23rd of this month.
Okay. Thank you, Ricardo. Does the commission have any questions of staff?
I do, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
I'd like to know what is the maximum or minimum lot that would allow for a ADU unit to be built?
As proposed in the draft, the minimum would be a 6,000 square foot lot.
Okay, 6,000. And then what about you said detach and also would allow attach. It means the resident can convert the garage into a bedroom, extra bedroom in the house. Would they allow it under ADU?
Per the draft, a property owner would be able to convert a garage to an accessory dwelling unit. However, the draft ordinance states that the property owner would have to replace the required off-street parking for the residents on the site. So if they chose to convert a garage, they'd have to build a new garage for the parking for the house.
Yeah, that's why my next question, what is the parking requirement for an ADU unit?
So for the ADU, per the draft, it would be a minimum of 1 parking space for the unit and then an additional parking space for each bedroom. So if you have a 2-bedroom ADU, it would be 2 parking spaces. Mm-hmm. However, if you qualify for one of those parking exceptions, you would not be required to provide any parking for the ADU, only for the single-family residence.
Okay. Thank you.
Phil?
Well, first I want to thank you guys for bringing this to us in this fashion. I know I'd asked for it about a month ago, so I appreciate you guys bringing it to us in this way, because I know that there's been concern among folks in the community about how fast this, well, first it was nothing going on, then it was kind of ramped up, and so I appreciate that. My question's more focused on the transit proximity. I was a little confused by the slide. You'd mentioned the 15-minute headways, but then you mentioned express. And so in the city, as I'm sure you guys know, we have the Bravo service, which OCTA would consider the express, along with the 53X. But there are buses in the city that have a 15-minute headway, the 53, the 60, et cetera. So are we saying it's just the express routes, or are we saying it's all bus routes in the city with a 15-minute headway?
Express. So we looked at all bus routes with 15-minute or less headways, and that happened to be pretty much covering the entire city. So that's when we took a look at the different services being provided and then came up with this definition and this map, and it's for 15-minute or less express routes. So that's why you see the stops a little bit more scattered, whereas if you were out there on the ground, there are going to be a lot more stops that are there, but they're not the express routes, or different services.
Okay. It came off a little confusing because, excuse me, there are routes that aren't express, but they do have that sort of headway. And I know that, whatever SB it is, utilizes the definition as just bus routes with 15-minute headways as something to utilize for transit proximity. So are there any other jurisdictions that you're aware of that are kind of fine-tuning it to be more of a express route versus just 15-minute headways?
That I know of, City of Newport Beach utilized the same definition of 15-minute or less headways, but not the express routes. And I think that has to do with the amount of transit service that they have compared to what we have. Mm-hmm. And for them, the 15-minute or less headways happened to cover, did not cover the whole city. So I think they felt comfortable with that definition. And then going with this definition, as you can see, it does cover a significant portion of the city, but it does still leave some areas that would require parking.
Is there others in the state, other cities in the state that you guys looked at that may have gone with this definition? Because, I mean, it's a creative way to approach it. I'm just curious if it came from another jurisdiction.
No, that was all in-house.
Okay, good job, guys.
Lynette?
Very well. Oh, that's right. It was well done, so I appreciate it. Gave me a lot more information than I originally had. Just a question about design standards as far as the ADUs. Can we impose design
Part
standards?
of the draft does have a section in there requiring ADUs comply with the city-adopted citywide design guidelines. And just as early as this afternoon, actually, we were discussing with Candida the need possibly to add another chapter or a section to our citywide design guidelines to be more specific to ADUs. So in the ordinance itself, it does say shall comply with the citywide design guidelines. And then I think we're probably going to go a step further and add a section just for accessory dwelling units.
Okay, that sounds good. That was going to be my next question.
Mr. Chairman?
Thank you.
Ken?
You mentioned earlier you have also have a diagram to show indicated the setback of the property 20 feet front and back and side, 5 feet on both sides. What was the setback requirement before this ADU ordinance?
So the previous ordinance allowed an accessory dwelling unit to be within 10 feet of a rear yard, and this would be 20 feet.
Okay. So we increase it, the setback requirement.
Right. This would be the same setback that's required for the primary or for any of the buildings on the site. So instead of having a special or a separate standard for the ADU, we just have to comply with the general standards of the zone.
Okay. Are we compared of the ADU ordinance from our city with other surrounding city in Orange County like Garden Grove, Westminster, and so on? I know that those cities are very aggressively promote the ADU.
Yes, we're currently looking at the cities that are adopting them as they come online. As we were working on it, there's actually only been a handful that have adopted them. So we were also looking at examples from Central and Northern California. And then the attorney that we have on board that's helping us out with Best and Krieger, he's experienced with some other cities here in Southern California and then adopting their ordinances. So he's been helping us out and then kind of going through our ordinance to make sure that it'll hold up to legal challenges.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Bill?
Going back to the portion about the parking exceptions, and one of the 5 was architecturally significant historic districts. So I guess I'm trying to see where the leap is there. So if I have a real pretty house that happens to be historic, now my parking's impacted?
I think the state's thinking in that language was that these historic districts might already be in what's considered like a historic downtown or these more dense neighborhoods where parking may not be needed as much or may have more access to transit.
So it's a state requirement then?
Right. So that language that was on there was all lifted straight from state law.
So no matter how much we want to parse and chop up the ordinance, that language about architecturally significant historic districts would be in there.
Correct.
It just seems to me it's that one size fits all. Everybody's going to have the same districts. I mean, technically in a couple of years you'll have some historic districts in Irvine. And I would argue that they're probably not within a couple half mile of a transit stop. So it's just kind of frustrating to have that. The other thing this is more of a comment on my part. I mentioned this at a previous subcommittee meeting, and that if we're going to talk about tweaking the park deficient guidelines, I think that we should actually get to the point where we're actually providing the park. I mean, just coming up with someone having enough room in their backyard really doesn't serve the purpose of the overall city good by providing open space. So perhaps that if we are going to go down the route of trying to figure out a way to allow ADUs in these areas, that we actually also require some sort of fee. Nothing egregious, but just something that would go to actual park acquisition, not disappear into the general fund, but rather something specific for park acquisition.
Good, thank you. Patrice?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Wanted to thank the city because they allowed 3 of the commissioners to attend the planning directors forum, and they did have a good presentation on that. I know, Ricardo, you did a great job with your slides. I think they did say they were going to provide it on the website. So for our other fellow commissioners, if you want to look at the website, it's the the Planning Directors Association of Orange County. And going back to the parking, I think one of the things they mentioned was that for a studio, they were going to allow no parking. Is that what it's looking like for Santa Ana?
So the city can be less restrictive on the parking. So we can say for studio units, we don't want any parking, but it does allow the city flexibility in that we can require parking for that. So the way the draft is currently written is that for studio units and 1-bedroom units, 1 parking space would be required for that. Then if you then propose a 2-bedroom unit, it'd be 2 spaces.
Any other questions of staff at this time? Hearing none, before we close this work study, we have received 2 requests to speak. The first one is Julie Humphreys. And before I forget, just in case everybody else would like to speak, we have a couple people. It's 3 minutes, so if you'd like to put in a request to speak card, please fill them out now, and then we'll go from there.
Thank you for hearing me, and I appreciate the difficulty in coming up with a draft local ordinance that complies with the state ordinance. I'm handing out a copy of the park deficient area map that I was provided with last week, and a copy of the draft ordinance for your review, and a copy of the state statute. And when I look at this, I feel like the city needs to keep in mind that the state of California has declared that the state is in a housing crisis, and they're trying to promote the construction of more flexible and more additional housing in the state. So the city needs to view this with an eye toward implementing this statute, not restricting the creation of ADUs. The cities are going to get more dense, the population's just going to increase. We need to find more flexibility and more affordable housing in our city. So the city should be promoting the construction of ADUs, not putting barriers and limitations on them. When I look at the draft proposed ordinance, I see that they are trying to insert terms that are more restrictive than is required by state. When they are talking about converting existing structures to ADUs, the city's imposing additional legal requirements that they have to be legally established, i.e. permitted, prior to construction. Nothing in the state statute requires that these pool houses, bonus rooms, home offices have been permitted prior to be converted to ADUs. The use of this park deficient area map, which effectively wipes out a good third of the city from being eligible to have an ADU, has no bearing with the requirements of the state statute, which says the city can impose some local zoning guidelines in terms of traffic, impact, or health and safety, but nothing about parks and whether there are available parks nearby. In fact, if you look at this map, some of these about right up, some of the red zones where they say they're park deficient, about right up to existing parks. So to create whole swaths of the city which would not be eligible for an ADU, I think creates an unreasonable and artificial barrier which goes against the import of the intent of the statute. And I urge the Commission to rethink that. Also, the requirement that the primary dwelling unit be continuously occupied by at least one person having an ownership interest in the lot. Again, the state statute says that you can require that the applicant for a permit to be an owner-occupier. There's nothing in the state statute that says that you have to require the person to live there for the entirety of the time they own their house, either in the main house or the ADU. We have plenty of existing ADUs in this city already. Nothing prevents those people from renting out all or any portion of their house for 30 days or longer. To impose this requirement on new ADUs, I think, is another artificial and unfair burden and barrier to ADUs, which is contrary to the intent of the state law. It should be like when you apply for a home loan, you can swear that you're an owner applicant. Again, also the size, 750 square feet. If you're trying to do an ADU for an elderly parent or a couple who need ADA requirements and wide access, 750 square feet is unreasonably small. Thank you.
Julie. Thank you. Gillard Savant.
So again, I'm a resident of Henninger Park, and much like the last speaker, I'm not here to talk about whether ADUs are great for the city or not so great for the city. I know there are a lot of my neighbors, especially those like me who own historic homes, are concerned about the ADUs. But having said that, the law's here, and it's from the state, and I know that we all hate taking our land use powers taken away from us. But I'm really concerned about how restrictive we're making this language. Obviously, I don't have a lot of expertise in this, but I'd be concerned that we'd be opening ourselves up to lawsuits or anything like that, because this language is overly restrictive to the point where you're essentially saying, hey, no ADUs here unless you already have an existing structure. I live in a neighborhood with no parks. And I'm one of 2 single-family owner-occupied homes on my block. The rest of the homes are all what used to be historic single-family homes, but are now multi-family units. And so to say that just because we are in a park-deficient area, there shouldn't already be accessory dwelling units or additional accessory dwelling units is just conflating 2 things that are totally arbitrary. There's already those people living in my neighborhood. They are humans who have housing, who are sharing, very small spaces between multiple families. And what you're doing with this language is saying, if there's an opportunity to build a new unit and to give people a little bit of a chance to spread out, to maybe not have to share one home with multiple families and instead, live in their own structure in the backyard, you're saying no to those folks. And I think that that's incredibly unfair. And it's also not recognizing the city that we already have, and especially in a lot of these park-deficient areas. A lot of them are in the middle of the city because as developments happened around the city, park impact fees got collected and parks were built. In my neighborhood, they weren't. And so to say that those 2 things should be connected makes very little sense. The other thing I would say is the minimum lot size of 6,000 feet, bringing it down to 5,000 wouldn't be unreasonable. But it would allow for certain areas like my neighborhood where there's a combination of both 5,000-foot lots and 6,000-foot lots to not have this weird patchwork of ADUs. as is the idea that we already are going to have to allow existing structures to be turned into ADUs. We're already going to have to allow it in a lot of different instances. And so to say that if you were lucky enough to have a house where you fit the state required guidelines, you can have an ADU, but everyone else is out of luck is really problematic. And let's not talk about the minor exception as if it's like some simple thing. It sounds minor, but to a homeowner, $2,500 fee just to apply for that, that's not chump change, right? I just went through a kitchen remodel, and my dad does kitchens all over the county, and he was shocked at the fees that we were charging folks to do work in their home permitted. And so the idea that we're brushing away the fact that this can happen, it's just a minor exception in these areas, that's $2,500, not to mention all the time and headache of going through that process.
Can we wrap up?
So that's it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Next is Mary Thornton.
I spoke before, I'm a resident of Wilshire Square, which is another neighborhood just south of Henninger Park. It's it's an older neighborhood, smaller homes on larger lots. We have a lot of renters. We have a lot of illegal rental units where we have multiple families living in homes. We have a lot of people living in garages, which are unsafe conditions. I am really strongly in favor of the ordinance as written by staff. I think they've put a lot of thought and effort into it. There has been a lot of community meetings where they've gotten a lot of feedback that people are really concerned and worried about the impact of these accessory dwelling units on their neighborhood and on the character of the neighborhood. So I would strongly urge you to support the ordinance. I think the additional requirements that have been implemented in this proposed ordinance are within the law. An attorney's been hired to assure that they are, so that the city is not subject to lawsuits. I do think that, one of the main state requirements is that public health and safety impacts can be taken into account. We do have a very park-deficient city, and I do think it's important that the people who live in the city have places to go to recreate. Our neighborhood is quite impacted. Kids play in the street all the time because there are no parks for them to play in. Adding more people is not going to help with the health and safety of all these children that may be coming and moving, and to the fact that, yes, we do have people living in very crowded conditions right now. The city should be trying to figure out ways to help those people live in better conditions, and allowing landlords to build units where they're just going to cram people in, again, is not the answer. And I'm strongly in favor of making sure that you have owner-occupied deed restrictions on these, because if an owner has to live in one of the units, I think that will really help improve the quality of that housing that is rented out. And I've spoken to Candida. I know there's some work going on in Ricardo. I would encourage you to try and figure out ways to make the rents that are charged in these accessory dwelling units affordable for people. One of the big pushes for the state law was to get barriers out of the way so construction costs could be lower, but that really only is an advantage to the person who's building them. They still have the ability to charge market rents and crowd a lot of people into a space. So I think that whatever you can do to make these units affordable and to make sure that the owner is living on the property to assure that the building and that unit is kept to appropriate standards of health and safety and attractiveness is really critical. So I strongly support the ordinance as written. I would like to see, some way to impose rent control, not necessarily rent control, but that moderate to low income people have an opportunity to rent these units. And I'd encourage you to find ways to work with maybe with the housing department or whomever that you need to in the city to maybe roll that into this ordinance. But I think the way the ordinance is written now, that staff has done a great job. And I hope you strongly support it.
Thank you, Mary. The last card I have is Tim Rush.
Good evening, Commissioners. I have lived in town for 30-plus years and am a past president of both Washington Square and Wilshire Square neighborhood associations and served on the board of French Park. So I think I have some feel for the impact that this might have. And I apologize getting here late from work, but such is life. Work gets in the way. In any event, I may have missed this and you addressed it, but is there any provision in this proposed ordinance that would provide that the when an ADU is going to be approved or whatever, that there is some inspection of the garage to make sure that the garage is available for parking. There is a law on the books in Santa Ana now that says garages must be for parking and not for storage. But we all know that throughout the city that is not enforced. To try to get an inspection warrant for a garage is like near impossible. And we know that in many cases garages are being rented out illegally. And what I would hate to think is that we approve an ADU where somebody's already renting out a garage. There ought to be some mechanism that says the garage is inspected and it needs to be, if it's used for storage, it needs to be made available for parking. Why? Because parking is a critical component of this issue. And it's one of the main reasons why so many neighborhoods had neighborhood leaders with their hair on fire collectively over this issue of parking. It is a huge issue. I mean, there are fist fights breaking out in neighborhoods over parking. It's happened in my neighborhood. Fist fights breaking out over parking. There are neighborhoods where people routinely leave out their trash cans 7 days in a row so that they can have a place to park. They come home at night, put the trash cans up on the parkway, park their car in front of their house, because why they can't park in the garage because the garage is rented out or it's full of crap or whatever. So I just think that these are real life issues that are going on. These are not the exception. These are mostly the rule, and it ought to be addressed as a part of your ordinance and your deliberation. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Is there anybody else who would like to speak at this moment? Hearing none, Ricardo, thank you for your presentation. We appreciate it. Let's move on to the item 4, Waterwise Landscape Ordinance Video. Melanie McCann, take it.
Good evening, all. All right, so tonight we're going to walk you through an ordinance that you approved a few years back, and we have the opportunity to share with you a video that was produced through a collection of a couple different cities. We pulled our resources together, Brea, Fullerton, Tustin, and this was the result. It is available as of today online for kind of the novice professional, but we wanted to share it with you today and refresh your memory on what this ordinance was all about.
Welcome to the City of Santa Ana's video series on the Model Water Efficient Landscape Ordinance. You're probably asking yourself, what is this ordinance and does it apply to my project? Good question. As you may know, the state of California has a very complex water supply system that all California residents and businesses depend on. Due to the geography, the state has a limited supply of water and is prone to droughts. In an effort to address the ongoing concern with water availability, the state enacted a mandate that all cities and water agencies implement various measures to reduce water consumption. Although everyone can do their part by modifying their daily routines, the most significant potential water savings comes from water used for landscaping. The goal is to maintain the attractive landscapes that are an important part of the quality of life in California, while selecting plant materials and irrigation systems that conserve valuable water resources. The ordinance views water efficiency holistically by emphasizing conservation at all stages of the project, from design to installation to maintenance and management. This new normal is represented by the Model Water Efficient Landscape Ordinance, which was adopted in 2012 and amended in 2015. It identifies various types of landscape projects that must be designed to use water efficiently based on square footage thresholds and property type. This is achieved by establishing what's known as a maximum applied water allowance, also referred to as a MAWA, to set up an upper limit for water use and to reduce water use to the lowest practical amount. For clarification, the term applied water in the MAWA definition refers to water supplied by an irrigation system to the landscape. The basic premise goes like this. You can only use X amount of water to irrigate your landscape, so show us how you plan on doing that. Now that you're familiar with the goal of the ordinance, you're probably asking yourself, does it apply to my project? Another good question. The state has identified two basic project types, new and rehabilitated landscapes. Depending on the category, if you exceed the size threshold, then you're required to comply with the water reduction measures and maximum applied water allowance. So what are these project minimum thresholds? First, projects with a new total landscape area equal to or greater than 500 square feet. Second, existing rehabilitated landscapes with a total area greater than or equal to 2,500 square feet. These requirements do not apply on registered local, state, or federal historical sites. It's important to note the ordinance only applies when you exceed the minimum threshold and require a permit or planning review from the City of Santa Ana. If your project does not apply, we still encourage you to consider water-conserving plant materials and irrigation systems. Let's run through a few different scenarios. First, a new commercial development is being built, and they're installing 5,000 square feet of new landscaping. Yes, it must comply because the overall project requires a building permit, and it exceeds the 500 square foot threshold for new landscapes. In this example, a single-family home is completing a front yard remodel with 1,000 square feet of rehabilitated landscaping. No, because it does not exceed the 2,500 square foot threshold for rehabilitated landscapes. A multiple family development is renovating approximately 4,000 square feet of the landscaping. Yes, the project is above the threshold for rehabilitated landscapes and requires a design review, so it is required to comply with the ordinance. A new single-family housing development has approximately 10,000 square feet of common area and front yard landscaping. The individual backyards of the homes are left unlandscaped for the future homeowners to complete. In this case, the new common area and front yard landscaping must comply with the ordinance because it exceeds the threshold for new landscaping and the development requires a building permit. Note, this is viewed as one holistic project despite landscaping being located on different lots. When the new homeowners start their backyard projects, the ordinance will apply only if the design triggers a permit and is over the threshold size. In the following video, we will talk about what you need to submit during the design phase and after construction. We hope this video has helped you to understand the thresholds in the Model Water Efficient Landscape Ordinance. If you have any questions, please call to speak with a planner,
or check the website.
Thank you.
Sorry. So are there any questions on the video or the requirements? Okay. So that's available. It's pretty straightforward, but there still are some folks that aren't understanding it, so it's a nice resource for them on the website. And then we also have other handouts and things related to landscaping on our website to help the developers.
Okay. No question. Thank you, Melanie.
You're welcome.
Appreciate that. Okay. With that, we'll move on to staff comments.
None tonight from me, sir. Thank you.
Candida? Okay. Planning Commissioner comments. Phil, start with you. Lynette?
Just want to thank Vince for getting back to me the information I had asked for at a previous meeting. Thanks.
Cynthia?
I want to say thank you for the opportunity to go to the conference last week. And if there is a possibility that we could get the materials that were in the other workshops and get that to all of our planning commissioners, that'd be great. Thank you.
Beatrice?
I just want to say thank you again for giving us the opportunity as well, like Vice Chair Contreras said. And also just hoping that everyone in Santa Ana stays safe. I know my son goes to Sonego Canyon and they were evacuated. So let's just hope that, they're fully contained. Thank you.
Ken?
I'd like to thank staff for very well done. They studied the material. I learned a lot this evening about ADUs and water sources in our city. Again, thank you so much for a job well done.
The only thing I'd like to comment on is the fact that, the ADU, obviously, hearing some of the speakers from the audience tonight, it's obvious that this is not an easy project for us to take upon. It's something that's going to be a challenging situation, and we can see there's people that are in favor and those that are not in favor. And so, I just think that as we continue to put the word out, I think we start to refine what we're doing with regards to the proposal based on the feedback we're getting. Hopefully we'll be able to do that. I don't know what the timeline is for this at this point in time. Candida, can you speak to that?
Yes, we're moving forward with it. It's going to the Planning Commission at your next regularly scheduled meeting, which is October 23rd, right? And then to the City Council on November 7th.
So the intent is to get it done by the end of the year.
That is the intent.
Okay. No other comments with that?
Sorry.
Jump.
Chairman, I will not be attending the...
Turn your mic on.
I will not be attending the next city council meeting with my fellow commissioners. I had previous commitments. I think you're going to present on what the commission is doing.
Right.
I will not be attending. I apologize.
Okay. All right. Do we want to, just any comments on that just before? Okay. Yes.
I would like to have Mr. Chairman to add one more comment. I will not able to make it for next Plan Commission meeting on October 23rd. We'll be out of the country during that time.
Okay. Thank you for noting that.
I will not
Lynette?
be able to attend the city council meeting with you next week because I'll be out of the country. But I will be here for the next Plan Commission meeting.
Okay.
Thanks.
Great. All right. Thank you very much. With that said, we're adjourned. Thank you.